Namaste to all the students. I JVN Dr. Ekta, Assistant Professor of English in Faculty of Education and Methodology. I welcome you in the lecture of Introduction to English Literature. Today's topic is Introduction to English Language. That it's not easy to pinpoint exactly when a specific language begins. But in the case of English, we can at least say that there is little sense in speaking of the English language as a separate entity before Anglo-Saxons, as I have discussed in previous session. Little is known of this period with any certainty about Germanic invaders. They came and settled in Britain from the northwestern coastlines of continental Europe in the 5th and 6th century. The invaders all spoke a language that are Germanic, as I have discussed, but we will probably never know how different their speech was from that of their continental neighbors. However, it is fairly certain that many of the settlers would have spoken in exactly the same way as some of their North European neighbors, and that not of all the settlers would have spoken in the same way. The reason that we know so little about the linguistic situation in this period is because we do not have much in the way of written records from any of the Germanic languages of northwestern Europe until several centuries later. Then, when Old English writings began to appear in 7th, 8th, and in 9th century, there is a good deal of regional variation, but no substantial more than that found in later periods. This was the language that Alfred the Great referred to as English in the 9th century. The name of the person was Alfred the Great. The Celts were already resident in Britain when the Anglo-Saxons arrived, but there are few obvious traces of their language in English today. Some scholars have suggested that the Celtic tongue might have had an underlying influence on the grammatical development of English, particularly in some parts of the country, but this is highly speculative, isn't it? The number of loan words known for certain to have entered where they ended in Old English from this source is very small. Okay, the next invaders were the Norsemen. Norsemen. From the middle of the 9th century, large number of Norse invaders settled in Britain, particularly in northern and eastern areas. And in the 11th century, the whole of the England had a Danish king, Canute. The distinct North Germanic speech of the Norsemen had great influence on English, most obviously seen in the words that English has borrowed from this source. And this include some very basic words such as take, and even grammatical words such as they. The common Germanic ways of the two languages meant that there were still many similarities between Old English and the language of the invaders. Some words, for example, give GIVE, perhaps show a kind of hybridization, with some spellings going back to Old English and other being Norse in the origin. However, the resemblances between the two languages are so great that in many cases it is impossible to be sure of the exact ancestry of a particular word or spelling. However, much of the influence of Norse, including the vast majority of the loan words, does not appear in written English until after the next great historical and cultural upheaval, the Norman conquest. Then, after 1100, what happened? The centuries of the Norman conquest witnessed enormous changes in the English language. In the course of what is called the Middle English period, the fairly rich inflectional system of Old English broke down. It was replaced by what is, broadly speaking, the same system English has today, which, unlike Old English, makes a very little use of distinctive word ending in the grammar of the language. The vocabulary of English was also changed enormously, with the tremendous numbers of borrowings from French and Latin. Old English, like German today, showed a tendency to find native equivalents for foreign words and phrases, whereas Middle English acquired the habit that modern English retains today of readily accommodating foreign words, like trilingualism in English, French, and Latin was common in the worlds of business and the professions, with words crossing over from one language to other with ease. Then, if we talk about standardization, the late medieval and early modern periods saw a fairly steady process of standardization. Okay, the written and spoken English of London continued to evolve and gradually began to have a greater influence in the country at large. For most of the Middle English period, a dialect was simply what was spoken in a particular area, which would normally be more or less represented in a writing, although where and from whom the writer had learned how to write were also important. It was only when the broadly London standard began to dominate, especially through the new technology of printing, that the other regional varieties of the language began to be seen as different in kind. As the London standard became used more widely, especially in more formal contexts and particularly amongst the more elevated members of society, the other regional varieties came to the stigmatized as lacking social prestige and indicating a lack of education. In the same period, a series of changes also occurred in English pronunciations, which go under the collective name of the Great Vowel Shift. As I have discussed earlier, also, these were very purely linguistic sound changes which occur in every language in every period of history. The changes in pronunciation were not the result of specific social or historical factors, but social and historical factors would have helped to spread the results of the changes. Okay, as a result, the so-called pure vowel sounds which still characterize many continental languages were lost to English. The phonetic pairings of most long and short vowel sounds were also lost, which gave rise to many of the oddities of English pronunciation and which now obscure the relationships between many English words and their foreign counterparts. Thank you for watching.